I smoked this brisket overnight and got a full night's sleep. So in this video, I'm going to show you how I did it. All right, so here we've got our full brisket. This one weighs around 7.5 kilos, and we've got the flat on this side and the point end on this side. Now the first thing I'm going to do is remove this top flap. As you can see, it's quite thin. It causes an uneven shape and it's just not going to cook down very nicely. And when I'm trimming a brisket, I always keep in mind that I want to be trimming it in a way that it's going to be nice, aerodynamic and even in shape. The more even in shape our brisket comes out, the more even it's going to cook. And what I mean by trimming it in an aerodynamic way is basically that I want our brisket to end up in a shape where any juices are going to run off our brisket instead of pooling up in sections. And now I've removed that top flap, what I like to do next is just trim any hard fat down to 2 to 3 mil thick. And if you're a bit in doubt, it's always best to leave more fat on than to take more off. If you're working with a Wagyu brisket, you can afford to take a little bit more fat off, but if you're working with something leaner, then maybe leave a little bit more on. And as I'm trimming my brisket, I'm going to put all the hard white fat to one side, and then I'll put some of the leaner stuff to the other side, because later in the video, we're going to make some beef tallow and mince. Alright, so I'm pretty happy with the top section of this brisket. We're still going to work on the shape after we've trimmed the bottom. So I'll flip it over, and now we just want to remove any excess fat and silver skin from underneath. And if you've got any bits that are sunken in, you're struggling to trim off, I like to just put my hand underneath the brisket, raise it up, and that'll make it easier to trim. Now usually on one side of your brisket in between the point and the flat there's going to be a huge pocket of fat. This brisket wasn't too bad, but if there is that big pocket of fat, you just want to do your best to scoop as much fat out as you can. Now this thin fatty part over here I'm not going to worry about too much because we'll probably trim that completely off as we shape our brisket. And unfortunately we've got a big slush here in our brisket, there's not much we can do about that. But I'm pretty happy with this bottom section now, so what we're going to do is flip our brisket back over and start working on the shape. Now this might seem a little bit wasteful, but what we're going to do is just take off any thin edges and basically round off our brisket so it's a nice uniform even shape. Because any thin edges like this are just going to overcook or burn, so we're just going to work around our brisket and we'll deal with all our off trimmings shortly. Alright, now we are left with a beautiful, nicely shaped, even brisket that is ready to be seasoned and smoked. And now our brisket's all trimmed up, we're going to work on our off trim. I'm going to have one tray for the fat, which we'll make beef tallow from, and another tray for some of the leaner stuff, which I want around 80% lean meat to 20% fat, which we'll be mincing up. And now we've sorted out our off trim, what you can do with the fat is either transfer it to a pot and put it on the stove on low heat and let it go for a few hours, stirring every half an hour or so until all of that fat has rendered out, or you can leave it in the tray and put it in your barbecue along with your brisket when you smoke it. Or what I'm going to do is put my oven on at around 120 to 150 Celsius and I'll just let it go in there for a few hours until all that fat's rendered out. Then with our leaner stuff, I'm just going to put that in the freezer for 30 minutes along with our mincer parts, just so we get a really good grind out of it. And now it's time to set up our mincer. And for a nice brisket smash patty style mince, like I said, we want to be at around 80% lean meat to 20% fat, and I like to run through twice on a coarse grind, just so that fat and meats distributes evenly. And for anyone wondering where this mince is from, unfortunately this is a few years old. I got it off Amazon, but they don't make this model anymore. It's just a cheapie, but it still does the job just fine, so go online and have a look around because there's heaps of similar minces. And as you can see, after 2 coarse grinds, we're left with some beautiful mince. Then with our beef fat, you can see after a few hours that heaps of fat has rendered out. So what I'm going to do is strain that into a jar, and I reckon I can get a bit more beef tallow out of this, so what I'll do is put that tray of fat back in the oven for another few hours to see how much more I can get out. And there you have it, we're left with some beef tallow, a beautifully trimmed brisket ready to be seasoned and thrown on the smoker, and some smash burger mince. Alright, now before we season our brisket, we're going to set our smoker up. We're going to be using the Oklahoma Joe's Tahoma gravity fed smoker, so we'll open up both of our vents, then you want to get a little bit of lump charcoal or briquettes in the hopper, then I'll put 2 chunks of cherry wood in, then I'll fill the hopper up the rest of the way. After that we'll get our charcoal started with 2 firelighters in our ash pan. Then we'll turn our smoker on and select our temperature. For this cook, I want to go as low as this smoker can go, which is 225 Fahrenheit or 107 Celsius. Alright, so while our smoker's coming up to temperature, we're going to season our brisket. And to help our rub stick to the meat, I'm just going to give our brisket a light coat in some yellow mustard. Now, if you don't have any yellow mustard or you don't like it, just use some olive oil instead. We're going to be seasoning this brisket in our beef bounce rub. This rub's got a good mix of salt, pepper, garlic. It's got some mushroom powder for a nice umami hit. It's got a hint of coffee in there as well, and it'll give our brisket a really nice bark. So we'll give our brisket a nice generous coat on both sides, then it'll be ready for the smoker. Alright, now our smoker's up to temperature. I'll open it up. Then I'll get 2 drip trays underneath where the briskets are going to sit. Then I'll put some water in them just to help keep some moisture in our barbecue, just because we won't be spritzing our brisket due to this being an overnight cook. Then we'll get our brisket on the rack above those trays, shut our lid, and let this start smoking away. So the time is now 9 PM, and just before I go to bed in around an hour's time, I'll refill that hopper. Then I'll let this brisket go overnight and we'll check on it in the morning. Alright, it's now 7 AM, so our brisket's been going for 10 hours, and I just want to check on the hopper before we check on the brisket. And it looks like we've got about 1/3 of our charcoal left, which is great. And now we can have a look at our brisket, and we'll just check our internals to see where we're at. We're at about 75 Celsius in the point and about 83 to 84 in the flat. So what I'll do now, so I don't burn my hands, is get some gardening gloves on. Then I'll get some nitrile gloves on over the top, and we can get our brisket out. Then we'll get it on a few layers of good quality foil. Then we'll get some of our beef tallow from earlier on top. Now, to help the point catch up to the flat, we're going to cover the point completely in foil whilst leaving the top of the flat exposed, just so the point can cook a bit faster. Then we'll get it back in the smoker. And now I'm going to increase our temperature to 250 Fahrenheit or 120 Celsius. And now we're going to let our brisket go until it's probing nice and tender. Now, I normally wouldn't start doing that until it reaches an internal temperature of 205 Fahrenheit or 96 degrees Celsius. But because this one's been going lower, slower, and longer overnight, that brisket's had more time to sort of break down and get nice and tender. So we're going to start checking this one at an internal temperature of 195 Fahrenheit or 90 degrees Celsius internally. I reckon it's going to take at least 2 more hours to get there, so we'll let it go and check back in soon. Alright, so it's been just over 2 hours since we got our brisket back in the smoker, so we are around 12.5 hours into this cook now. Still got a bit of resistance up our point end. We are sitting at about 89 degrees Celsius now. Our flat is feeling nice and tender, and we're sitting at around 94 degrees, so that point is definitely catching up to the flat. I reckon another 30 to 60 minutes and our point will be done. Alright, it's been about 45 minutes since we last checked in. That point is feeling much softer, and we're at an internal temperature in the point of around 93 to 95 degrees Celsius, and our flat is sitting around 96, 97, and I'm happy with how that probe tenderness is feeling, so let's get this out and onto our cutting bench. And now what I'm going to do is just unwrap that point side, and now we're going to let our brisket steam off just so it stops that cooking process and doesn't overcook. I'll let it sit like this for 5 to 10 minutes. After that, I'll cover it completely over with foil and then let it rest for a good 2 to 3 hours before we come back to slice and serve it. Now I'm going to be resting this brisket in my tucker box. It's pretty much just an esky or cooler with a front opening door. So if you've got something similar, try and rest your brisket in something insulated. If not, you can always rest your brisket in your oven set to around 70 degrees Celsius or 160 Fahrenheit. Alright, after about a 2.5 hour rest, we can get our brisket out to slice it up. Now, if you're holding your brisket in something like I did, you should be able to rest it in there for up to 6 hours or even more. But if you needed to rest and hold your brisket for a bit longer at a nice eating temperature, then doing it in the oven at around that 70 degrees Celsius is probably a better option. But all I'm going to do now is get our brisket out of the foil, pour some of those juices over our brisket, and then slice it up. So we've got our point end on this side and our flat on this side. I'm just going to start by cutting our brisket pretty much straight in half. So with our flat, I'm just going to continue taking slices the way we sliced our brisket in half. And as you can see, our brisket passes that flop test. Then with our point end, you can see the point muscle running over this side. So I'm just going to rotate our brisket and take some slices off this way. Now we're running out of that point muscle. I'm just going to take the last little bit off like that. Cut them into a few burnt ends. Then we're going to rotate our brisket back the way we were slicing the flat and continue slicing that way. That's just one of those small flat pieces and it's still nice, juicy, tender and full of flavour. Well, there you have it. There's how to smoke a brisket overnight without losing any sleep. If you've got any questions, don't hesitate to ask them in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our next videos. But for now, that's the end of this video. So thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one.